Hello, everyone, and Happy New Year to you. Um, Happy 2017. This is Roger Capello from the Wachusett Chess Club, bringing you the weekly action. And I have a very exciting game this week at least it was exciting for me and for my opponent. I played against Rob King in the final round of the George Sturgis Memorial. And I'm actually going to do something a bit different this week because Rob sent me some extensive notes that he made after the game. And I thought rather than using my own PGN documented file that I'd try working off of his. It might prove a bit confusing. I might have to start and stop the recording a few times. So we'll see how that goes. But first off, before I launch into that game, I wanted to say a little bit about give you this sort of the astronomy corner picture of the week here. As you can see, showing the Earth as seen from the moon by a lunar orbiter. And last night, on New Year's Eve, we had a somewhat unusual occurrence in that there was a leap second, as many of you know. There's an extra second put in at the end of the year. Sometimes they're only on 6-month boundaries, and not every 6-month boundary. In fact, I don't know how many, it's maybe 25% of them, something like that actually get a leap second. And it's just after 23:59:59, they have an extra second that's called 23:59:60. And then it turns over to 000 in the new year. And people program computers and so on have to worry about these things, that they keep their timekeeping right. But in astronomy, the interesting part of the story for me is really the physics of what's going on with the leap second. And they're caused by the fact, of course, that the Earth is slowing down its rotation very gradually. And the physical cause for that slowdown of the Earth's rotation is the tides that are raised on the Earth by the moon and the sun, but principally the moon. It's about a factor of 2 larger than the tides raised by the sun. And what is happening is that the tides come up, there's a tidal bulge that's raised up on the lunar side of the Earth, that is right below the moon. There's actually a symmetric bulge on the other side of the Earth, and I won't get into the details of why you get this symmetry. I'd be glad to explain it to you in person. But this tidal bulge that is nominally right under the moon or right under the sun is actually offset a little bit because tides don't act instantaneously. It takes time for the water to flow, and the water, there's some friction between the water flowing and the sea surface. So like the Bay of Fundy, the water comes in, takes a fair amount of time to fill up the Bay of Fundy, and then after it gets full and it starts emptying, it takes it a while to empty. And because of this, the tidal bulge lags a bit behind where the moon actually is. And what that means is that bulge is carried a bit eastward by the rotation of the Earth. And it's no longer nice and symmetric. It's actually off of the Earth-Moon line. And the tidal bulge has the effect that the moon's gravity pulling on that bulge acts as a brake to slow down the Earth. And that's what causes the Earth's rotation to slow down. And it's gone from, like the day was short enough a few billion years ago where there were 400 days per year, and now we only have about 365. And it will continue to slow down. Similarly, that because of that action of the moon on the Earth, due to Newton's second law causing a reaction, there's a torque applied to the moon, pushing it along in its orbit. And because of the way celestial mechanics works, that actually causes the moon then to spiral further out from the Earth. So the moon is receding at about 1 centimeter or so per year, which you can measure with lunar laser ranging, and watch it as the moon goes away from the Earth and goes further and further out. It used to be quite a bit closer to the Earth several billion years ago. Anyway, that's enough astronomy. Let's get into the chess. So Rob is a very strong player. I wasn't planning to play him. He's a strong expert, almost master, and I was paired up with Gary Broussard, but due to who showed up and who didn't, my preparations for Gary kind of went out the window, and I got Rob instead, which I knew from the outset would prove to be quite a challenge. Fortunately, I had white, and I opened up with my what's getting to be more common than not d-pawn opening. Now let's get the focus in the right place here. Cancel that. Okay, so go back d4, d5, c4, e6. Okay, we're going along the lines of Queen's Gambit decline. As you can read in Rob's comments, he was happy with that because he was looking for a less wild game than he's been having lately in the King's Indian defense. So I was happy to go into that line, knight f6. Then I tried something actually a bit new for me, this bishop f4 line, which is a little bit like the London system, but this is not the London system. But it's because the pawn that's already here on c4 is not, whoops, get back there. Wrong, press the wrong button. There we go. On c4, that pawn would normally be on c3 instead. So it's it's certainly playable. It's, you know, typically in the QGD people fairly automatically play their bishop out to g5, but this bishop f4 is a playable line as well, and I thought I'd see what would come from it. Rob set up sort of a triangle system. I played e3. The reason for that, of course, is to defend my pawn that's on c4, and also to develop my bishop so I can get on with the process of getting my pieces out. He developed his knight through d7. I developed my king knight. He played bishop e7. These are all fairly reasonable, standard-looking moves, so I won't spend too much time on them because, as I said, it was a complicated game. And at this point, after he did that, I tried an idea that I've heard about recently, that sometimes it's a good idea to exchange pawns in these structures, but only after the opponent has committed themselves to the b knight to d7. If I had traded pawns earlier, then the c6 square would have been open, and he could have developed his knight through c6. Instead, he's got it on a square where it is a little more awkwardly posted, and will have to get out of the way before his late squared bishop can come out, and so on. And it seemed like an interesting idea. So I went ahead and did it. He took back with the e-pawn, didn't want a symmetric pawn structure, and also this way his bishop, late squared bishop, may enter the game more usefully. This now, of course, I wanted to do this exchange before I developed my bishop because if I didn't, then he could have taken my c-pawn and I would have had to have recaptured. Now I don't have to worry about that. There's another reason for doing it when I did. He played his knight to f8, which took me a little bit by surprise. In his notes, as you can see, he says it's a common maneuver. I guess I haven't played that many QGDs, so I haven't really seen this too much. But it's, as he says, he has ideas of coming to g6 and then h4 with that knight at some point when it makes sense. Okay, move this up a little here. So I played h3 in order to restrict his late squared bishop, and that really cuts down on the squares that he has. He no longer can play it to g4, he can't play it to f5 because of my bishop. He can play it to e6 if he wants to, but I might come under attack by my knight immediately. So it really cuts down on his possibilities. He'd continue with the knight motion. He didn't want to keep that knight there where it kept him from castling. And in particular, he's attacking my bishop. That was another key point to that h3 move, was that it makes well, it makes loot for my king, but more importantly, it makes a square that my bishop can retreat to if it gets attacked by his knight. Now, it's true that he could have, in this position, before he played knight to f8, he could have attacked my knight immediately. Get back there. Right, with knight to h5, in which case, well, I could conceive of leaving it there and recapturing on f4, or I could, what I was actually planning to do was play bishop to g3, in which case at some point, he doesn't have to do it immediately, but at some point he may end up exchanging that knight for the bishop, and it gives my rook the possible avenue into the game, although I may have by the time he exchanges here, I may have actually castled, in which case it looks more like a weakness than a avenue for my rook. Anyway, as I said, that didn't happen. I was able to play h3 because of his knight move, and then when he attacked it, then I was able to tuck it back into that slot that I made. He castled, I castled, and then he fought me for control of that dark square diagonal here that our two bishops are on. But at this point now, I am in a good position to play knight e5 and not allow the bishop exchange. And I was happy with would have been happy with the trade-off of the knights here. But after he played rook to e8, now he's actually threatening to outright win a pawn on that square. And I have to play f4 in order to support it. But of course, f4 it has other nice aspects. It supports a kingside attack that is brewing up here. One can imagine g4 coming very soon, and these pawns coming in attacking his knights. The one downside to this move, of course, is that this square on e3, oops, not that square. No, don't know how to take that back. But that square on e3, the pawn on e3 becomes very weak, and it might limit me, what I want to do with, say, trading off this knight at some point, because he would then get a strong attack against the backward pawn on the e-file. So that's a bit of a drawback, but I wasn't too worried about it. I felt that I could keep it shielded, and that my pawn attack would come. It would be strong enough that we wouldn't get into those late end game, or late middle game, early end game positions where that pawn becomes a really serious weakness. Okay, so Rob acted. I have a friend who's a Bob King, so it's easy for me to make the slip. I think he likes to be called Rob. Acted very energetically here with c5. And what this, of course, does is counterattacks in the center. I'm attacking on the flank, and threatening to get this g-pawn move in next. And the way to counterattack a way to counter a flank attack is to attack in the center. And this is, as he says, it's a scary move for him to make, because come back, I didn't mean to do that, because it really weakens the center, opens everything up, and if I can take advantage of the space advantage that I have, then I might, it might be me who profits from this. But when he played this move, the thing I was worried about was my weakness along the dark squared diagonal. I'm not worried about him pushing this pawn to c4. I would just drop my bishop back. That would be fine. That would be a positional mistake. But instead, if he trades off the c-pawn for the d-pawn, then all of a sudden I'm looking quite weak on this dark square diagonal. And I thought he might, have queen b6 at some point, attacking along that line. And so I wanted to, before I launched my kingside attack, I wanted to take care of this sort of permanent weakness I have along that diagonal. And I considered two ways of doing it. I was thinking about playing my rook up to f2 to block the line, and that has an advantage that if and when the queen comes to b6, it would also be defending this b pawn over here, and also maybe threatening to double rooks or allow my queen to come in behind the rook. So it has multiple uses. It seemed like a reasonable move to make. What I decided on was actually the move that the computer preferred, which was to go ahead and move my king to h1. And that, very much eliminates that problem along the dark square diagonal. But I realized as I did it that, of course, I would be weakening myself then along the light square diagonal, and that at some point, if his bishop is on b7, for example, it would be looking down right at where my king is living. And I knew that going into it. It took me a while of trading off between those two moves before I decided I would finally go ahead and make that weakening king move, weakening in some ways and strengthening my attack in other ways. So Rob, after that, played a6, looking to expand on the queen side, and I played my queen to f3. I like this move because it supported my pawn on e3, which then allows my knight to possibly move at some point, as I was talking about. And also it connects my rooks and allows my a rook to get into the game as well. At this point, Rob played c takes d4, and interestingly enough, this is the first. You can see he marked it as a novelty with that end. This is the first new move in the game. That is, when he looked in the database, up till now everything has been played before, and in particular this line with white playing queen to f3 was played in a game between a couple of 2400 players, and that game actually turned out as a win for black. Kotanjian versus Babujian in Yerevan a decade or so ago. But Rob played c takes d4, which I think is a not unreasonable move to make in this position. So I recaptured, and then he dropped his bishop back to c7. For two reasons. The principal reason is that I didn't mention it before, but when my queen came out to f3, I was putting, let's come back here. I was putting two attacks. So let's move back to the point where I actually played queen to f3. This was a double attack on his d-pawn. And so he had to do something about that. It's only defended once. He didn't have to do something instantaneously, and that's why he could make a pawn exchange first. But then he has to do something about that d-pawn, and what he chose to do was to drop his bishop back. Note that defending it with his light squared bishop here would be, of course, a bad mistake, because then the knight and bishop could be easily forked with a pawn move. So he wouldn't want to do that. Although actually I see now that it's a little more complicated than it, because black could play knight. Now I'll quickly show the line. If he played bishop to e6, and white could then fork the pieces, black could go ahead and take the knight, sort of undoing the fork. The fact that he's attacking the queen means that has to be taken care of first. But then there's a second fork that arises. And so he does, in fact, end up losing material. I'll double check that. Yep, he's at least a piece down, according to Stockfish. So that's clearly not a good idea. That's why instead of playing the bishop to e6, he dropped his bishop back. The other thing is that this bishop now, besides giving the queen a view along the d file of the d5 square, also is maybe introducing the idea of this bishop coming to b6, exerting some pressure on my isolated d-pawn. So it's a multi-purpose move. Struck me as a good one at the time. Then we'll move up here a bit. So then I played rook to e1. My original idea was actually, when I first looked at this, was to play the rook to d1, and then if like so, and then if he attacked my d-pawn with his bishop, I could defend it by just dropping my bishop back to either b1 or c2 along that diagonal. Now my rook defends the pawn. But as I looked at it, I decided that at this point it was more important to press on with the attack and not to worry about the that weak d-pawn. That it would be maybe a waste of time, that he couldn't afford to go at pawn hunting at this point. And so I played the rook all the way over to e1. And Sorry, rook to e1. There we go. Okay. Rob played his pawn to b5. That seemed like a reasonable move also when I saw him play it on the board. I had been worrying about my queen on f3, and as he says in his notes, the sequence of moves I was worried about was that if the knight came out to h5 attacking it, that I had a nice square on f2 I could go to, which would counterattack his knight and also defend my pawn, my isolated pawn. But then he could use this f5 square, and I can't afford to trade it off. It would just develop as bishop. And if I attacked it with the pawn, then he could drop back to d6, which would be an equal game according to Stockfish. So I kind of was glad to see that he didn't make that move at the time and instead went ahead with b5. Because I felt that his queen pawn action was coming a little slowly, and that my king pawn action would be more important. Although I did start to get worried now that he would press to push the b pawn further and attack my knight on c3, which would cause it to move. Although I wasn't as worried about that as I was interested in ramping up the pressure on his game, on his king side. So I played g4, and I see he's marked that as a dubious move. At the time, I actually did consider knight to c6, and I didn't. The problem is that I didn't evaluate it correctly. So it's sort of pretty what happens if I actually played, rather than playing the immediate g4, if I played knight to c6. Now what I was looking at was that if I played knight to c6, that his queen would just come up to d3, and that I wouldn't have anywhere to continue on here, right? But the thing is that the Stockfish is showing I could take on e8, the knight has to take back, and then I could take on d5. It's showing taking with the knight, and well, I mean, it's actually getting into something very similar to the line that he showed in his variation. So I won't go any further, although it's exactly the same trick with the knight fork on e7. So let me step back a little bit, and also turn off the cheating machine. So after knight to c6, that he's showing in his notes, queen comes to d7. If it as I said, it's pretty much the same thing as if it comes to d6. It really doesn't change it materially, because white can just go ahead and take the knight, the pawn on d5. And the point is that black's pieces are overworked, with the knight defending this pawn and rook, and the queen defending the pawn and the rook also, that he can't do both at the same time. And so if I take the pawn and he takes back with the knight, then I can just play queen takes knight because of this nice little fork that's coming up. He plays queen takes queen. I take his rook check. He blocks, and now knight check here would win the queen back. Actually, in this particular case, it leads to checkmate because the king has to move away from the knight, and rook takes f8 is even stronger. So there was a nice little tactic there that with the knight on c6, that suddenly this d pawn becomes unsupportable. But I missed it. It would have been a winning advantage at that point. Instead of that, what I played was g4, which is not a bad move. It's just missing the opportunity to strike, and that gave him time to play bishop b7. Now this square on oops, let me go back. This square c6 is now covered by the bishop. So I sat here and looked at this for a while. My original plan was to go ahead and push the g-pawn again to drive his knight away from the defense of the center. And I didn't do that. And the reason is he points out, let's see, let's move up here so we can see some more of his analysis. As he points out, it's the wrong pawn, although, you know, I looked at both pawn pushes and concluded that that the g-pawn would be the wrong pawn, that I should push the f-pawn instead. But that was wrong. But what I was looking at was that if I push the g-pawn instead, do I have this here? Yeah. Okay, what I did not do was to look at this correct continuation, knight to e4, and that was the problem. What I looked at was if I pushed g5, that would give him time to play the knight to d7. And I didn't like this because then if I went ahead and pushed the f-pawn again, he now has this e5 square totally under his control. He's got a bishop, knight, queen, oh, not the queen, bishop, knight, rook, and knight all attacking the square. And he could just take on e5, and he's in good shape. But what I didn't see was that if, I stepped back a little too far here, that if he went back to d7, that there's a really strong counter move given by the Silicon Beast that gives me, you know, a 3.5 or 4 pawn advantage. It's to sack on f7. I did look at some sacks on f7, but not in this particular line. And what happens is after the king takes and f5, that's a very threatening to capture the knight and open up the f line. That's a very scary position for him. If he drops back, right in this position here, the queen is overworked, basically. It's defending the bishop. It's also defending the rook. So by trading off the rooks and then taking the bishop, now black has gotten material equality, and his attack will continue on unabated. So this is a very nice sequence for black. If you look at the Stockfish analysis, it's up close to 4 pawns. But he wouldn't have done that if I played g5. A better move would have been for him to play knight e4. And now if he played knight e4, it's still good for white, right? It's half to 2/3 of a pawn, something like that. But it's nowhere near as good as after he makes the mistake of playing knight to d7. But the point is that g5, knight e4, that this position is actually better for white than what happened after pressing the f-pawn and him dropping back. Now, if you evaluate this, this is actually the advantage is swung in black's favor at this point. Or not. After knight f8, it hasn't swung in his favor. But if he actually played knight take the correct move, which was to play knight takes e5, this is slightly in his favor, right? Okay, complicated game. Like I said, it's hard to keep it all straight. Okay, well, this is getting more and more interesting. So what just happened was I did the whole recording, and when I played it back to test the quality of it, I discovered that the middle section from moves 19 to 34 had somehow been deleted. I think I had hit the pause button and had never restored the recording function, and as a result, I lost all that. So I'm going to have to re-record it, and that's why colors have changed a bit, and I probably moved around, and you'll definitely sense a discontinuity here. But that's what it is. Like I said, it was a confusing game. Okay, so this is Rob's commentary on alternative tonight to f8. And knight to e5, knight takes e5 would have been better, but it's that's not what he did. So I'll move along here, because one of the problems I noticed was that even with the middle section paused, the recording still ran on far too long. So I'm going to try to move along briskly here, and if you want to pause the recording, you can see what his analysis is. Also, I think we'll see if we can get his PGN file put up on the website at the club, the Choose a Chess Club, so you can take a look at the game there if you're interested in some of these other details. But I'll move along. And so after he dropped the knight back to f8, that gave me the opportunity to continue with g5. And this allows the attack to go on. Rob played the knight into e4, and as he says, this loses a pawn or sacrifices a pawn. To me, it looked to me like I was just winning the pawn, but what else is he going to do here? White's attack is pretty strong, and he can't just keep collapsing backward forever. So after that move, I had total control of that e4 square with many attacks, so that I end up winning a pawn on that square. I take his knight, he takes back, and then I take the pawn. And the nice thing about it then is that, as you can see from the arrow I drew the first time I recorded, that the bishop, my white bishop, is now neutralizing the pressure that he had with his bishop on b7 against my king. So that's a nice feature. In fact, he just went ahead and traded the bishops off. Now, at this point, I should say I have a choice of two ways to capture, either with the rook or the queen. It turns out, if you look very carefully with the engine, that they're just about equal. I chose to take with the rook. One problem with the rook, though, is that it does allow Rob this nice active move of centralizing the queen with queen to d5, and which puts me at my rook in kind of a weak pin. And at this point, I did something probably non-optimal. I played my rook to h4. I think the thought behind it was that I was threatening queen to h5, which would put maybe very strong pressure on the h7 point, I should say, especially with these pawns threatening to advance, and more or less forcing a queen trade. Now, I didn't, even if I, in this position, if I did the more reasonable move, I think, which is rook to g4, supporting my passed pawns, Bob probably would have ended up trading queens anyhow, because he needs to neutralize some of the force of my attack. So it would be better, let me cancel that. It would have been a better move, because then it is playing rook to g4 would have saved a little bit of time on the line in the game, as you'll see. So he traded off on f3, I took back, and now his bishop can attack that pawn on g5 and pin it. And you know, it's going to allow him basically to break up the pawn duo that otherwise is a real threat to the position of the white king. So I had to drop my rook back to defend that g-pawn. How did that happen? I'm having technical difficulties here today. Okay, so he attacked it. I defended that g-pawn, and that gives him time then to play his f-pawn up, forking my knight in the g-pawn, which basically forces me to trade my g-pawn. And I do so. And he gets to recapture with the bishop, and this, of course, is quite nice for him. It's starting to look like he has a more solid king position now, and I don't have that the pawn duo that was so dangerous and which could have been pushed forward to break up the black king side. So at this point, to continue on pressing an advantage, I redeployed my rook over to the open c file. with the idea of either getting to the 6th or 7th rank. And Rob came up with this idea. I sort of expected maybe h6 at some point, but with h5 you can do it with the tempo, which gives his king Luft, so he doesn't have to worry about the back rank mates anymore. And also, at the same time, as I said, causing my rook to move so that he basically gets it for free time-wise. So I dropped back to the 2nd rank. Now, it does weaken the g6 square here, which my knight will occupy soon. He played his rook over to attack my d-pawn in the center, and I really, I should have protected this d-pawn because it's the thing that's holding my knight in its aggressive position at e5. And instead, I went down kind of an ill-chosen path here, where I played rook to c6, thinking, aha, I'm attacking his bishop, threatening to win it because of the pin along the g-file. This pawn is not really defending the bishop. And if he takes time to defend this bishop, or move it, say, then I'll be able to play rook takes pawn, so I win the a-pawn. Which is all true, but it is sort of irrelevant. It's not very good. He chose to defend the pawn with his knight, which he wanted to bring the knight out into the game anyhow, so this actually helps his position. And I take the a-pawn, but then he gets the d-pawn in return. And this whole phase of the game, the part that, that didn't get recorded the first time through, was played with me getting very short on time. And as Rob's a strong blitz player, and fast time controls, he can do very well. I'm just the opposite. I get much weaker at fast time controls. That becomes obvious as I get pretty strongly outplayed over the next 15 moves. So my knight was no longer supported. I moved it into g6. It's a nice, fairly stable square that I can keep it on for a while, and might have the seeds of back rank mate threats in mind. But he continues to play, to develop his pieces here, and now all of a sudden you can really feel this shift in the attack. With his knight coming to g5, pretty soon it's my king that's going to be coming under pressure. Now, I was worried about, sorry, not doing this right here. Okay, so I was worried about my h-pawn. That's, of course, undefended, and so I decided to push it. That's maybe not the best move in this position because although it keeps my h-pawn from going lost, it just invites his knight into the position, and I probably should have instead just tried to protect that square so that his knight couldn't penetrate the position. So after he did that, let me scroll up so you can see a little bit more of his commentary. I played rook to f2 not only to attack his knight, which is obvious, but more importantly to make an escape square for my king so that I don't have back rank mate threats myself or difficulty handling his impending attack along the first rank. He comes down and checks me. As he said, I guess the other rook checking would have been stronger. I didn't consider that at all. At this point, I was trying to play just very quickly. I moved my king up to g2, and then when he plays his knight to h1, or to e1 check. I'm thinking ahead here. My king has a place to go on the h-file. Okay, I'm sure what he was thinking back when he was checking was that the knight would follow this path, e1 to d3, and then attacking my rook and also putting pressure on f4, although I have f4 well covered. So really just penetrating my position. I played to h3 because that allows me then to shield my king with my bishop. And he played the knight out. I imagine thinking about getting my rook to move and also coming in with his rooks with a mating attack. But the problem is this is a real mistake. And I had the move rook e2 as a counter strike. And this is one of those neat moves you can make when the back rank is so weak that you're threatening checkmate, because you can't afford to take that, of course. As he says, it was a punch in the gut for him. If he were to take it, then knight up check now just leads to mate. Notice that prior to putting the knight on the d3 square, he would have had the resource of dropping the rook back to d8 in this case. But now the knight is blocking that line, and that's what makes this whole combination possible. So he didn't take the rook. Turns out the best move if you're an engine is to go ahead and play rook to e1, and the rooks both defend each other. This works out okay. So if he... I'm just looking at this now, trying to decide why this is okay. Hold on a second. Yeah, right. If he were to take the rook on e1, then black could simply take back with a knight. That's the point. And if instead, if white takes the rook on e8, then of course black can just take back with the rook, and there's no mate threat on the back rank. So rook to e1 would have been a good resource at that point. Instead, he played rook to d8. Then I thought I was being clever, doubling up the rooks on the e file. It turns out that's not clever, that he has a defense to this, that there was a clever move, I just didn't see it. And the clever move here, in fact, a winning move, was to play bishop to c7. And what happens with bishop to c7 is that the rook has no square to go to. About the only square that it looks like it can go to without losing at least the exchange is c7, but if he were to do that, then this knight is threatening to come into this e7 square, forking the rook and the king, and white can trade off the bishop, and so rook takes bishop, pawn takes, and then the knight comes in with a fork. It's a little more complex than that because there's some counter checks and so on, but I don't really have time to show that right now. But bishop to c7 would have been a good move if I had had the time or the awareness to spot it, I guess. Instead, I played what I thought was a good move to double the rooks on the e-file, and I thought with an overwhelming checkmate threat here. And Rob thought for a long, long time here, got down under my time, under 5 minutes, and I thought I was checkmating him. But he found the only, the box move, the only saving resource, which was to play king to f7. And in this case now, I'm no longer checkmating him, and it's nothing quite works the way I wanted to. And so then I spent a long time looking at this, trying to prove that there really was a checkmate here, and I couldn't find one, and that's because there wasn't one. I did make an okay move. I played the rook over to c6, attacking his loose pawn. And let's scroll the game a bit here. Okay, and he took my pawn on b2. Note that the bishop is also attacking that square, so the knight is protected there. I can't just take it off with my rook. So I take his pawn. He takes time to throw in a check on my king, driving it back, and then brings his knight out through c4. At this point, I put my bishop into a better position. It was kind of buried there in h2. Now on f4, it also exerts an influence along this c1 to h6 diagonal, and in particular, it starts to control some of these squares that his knight and rooks want to use. Okay, he kept hopping around with his knight, and at this point, I had had enough. I figured I was going to lose to a fork here if I let the knight keep going, so I simply traded it off. It's not clear that's the best move, but it's the one I had time to think about. Then I checked on b7. Again, at this point, playing hope chess, hoping that maybe he'd block with the rook and I'd trade a pair of rooks off to simplify, because I was really having trouble with only a couple minutes on my clock. But he tucked his king back into a safer position, and then I checked with my knight, again hoping maybe that he would trade, but he just put his king yet into a safer position. So this is, a whole sequence of moves here that really aren't very purposeful on White's part, but he just didn't have the time to figure it out, and didn't have the instincts to do it quickly without figuring it out. So I returned my knight to g6. He brought his rook up to attack his pawn on f5. I decided to counterattack at this point, going after his g7 point. So I let him take that pawn, possibly not a smart move. And okay, so this is the point that Rob and I, or this one Rob stopped recording. I think maybe I stopped recording a little sooner than this because we were both so short on time. But Paul Godin was a good friend and served as scribe here. So if we go over to not to that, to my database, text, I have those moves that go forward a little bit here. Check. And we traded off there. I checked, and now we're getting back to the point we were at. King went to h7. I just returned to g6. He came up and attacked my f-pawn. I got ready to double my rooks on the 7th rank. He took that f-pawn. Now pawns are even, for I'm no longer a pawn ahead, but my knight now is no longer safe on g6, so it had to move. I'm not quite sure. I guess I didn't have a lot of choice about where to move it to at that point. That's really the only square. He came after the h-pawn now, and so I'm having dreams of crashing through on g7, but as you can see, it's just not going to happen in time. He checked me, and now his rook is defending that g7 square for a third time. I moved my king. He's able to check with the other rook. At this point, he's setting up a rolling rook checkmate here with rook over to h3. These are all played at blitz pace. In fact, I basically ran out of time at the end of the game. I think I got checkmated, but with like 2 or 3 seconds on my clock, and before we stopped the clock, I had run out of time as well. So these were all played very rapidly. So after I put my knight in position to put a third attack on that pawn, but it's too late. He checks me, and I come down to the first rank so that at least he can't come and mate me on h1, but then he simply transfers the rook to the other side, and I don't have time to do what I need to do in the corner there. I took with the knight. Taking with a rook check, I suppose, would have been a little better, but it would not have been enough better, because after rook takes, bishop takes, rook takes, king to the corner, now I'm still losing, but not quite as badly, and he might even have had better. So instead I took with the knight, and that of course allows a mate in one. So there you have it. It was a disappointing loss for me. I thought I was doing well at a few points in the game. It turns out I had overestimated how good my pawn attack was. It wasn't looking with the engine. The engine liked White, but it wasn't nearly as impressed as I was. It thought White was maybe a pawn ahead or so, and during that pawn thrust. And at the one point, after I rebounded with my rook coming to the e2 square, right here, I really this point I really thought I was winning, but that was just hallucination because I didn't see his move. But it turns out that at this point, when I oh, sorry, right there, bishop. All right. Okay, when I played my rook to e6, instead of doubling up the rooks on that file, simply playing this bishop move to c7 would have, if I were only clever enough, would have given me about a 3 to 4 pawn advantage at this point, according to the Stockfish. It keeps what it sees keeps getting better as it sees sees more and more of the possibilities for attacking this position. Anyhow, would have won material. So it was a fun game, but Rob, I think, had a well-deserved victory in it, and it's going to have to wait till next week, maybe, for my next chance at actually winning one. So long for now. Hope this recording worked.